Hey, welcome back, everybody. Uh, this time around, I am really pleased to welcome a friend that I didn't realize we've known each other as long as we have. Uh, to list all his accomplishments would take longer than the time we have for this. But just to say that he has just released his autobiography. And it is something that I highly recommend to anyone, to any in the arts, starting from radio, television, film, especially theater, because my friend Julian Schlossberg has been over the decades I guess I'd call him a Renaissance man, one of the leaders in our industry. I mean, he started out as a young man and now a mature young man, and everything from producing film, television, certainly theater, radio, the list goes on and on. So let me introduce you, my friend Julian Schlossberg. Hello there.
Hello, Mike, and how nice to hear all those accolades. I keep thinking, is my father alive? What's going on here? But anyhow, it is nice to know that I was able to work in all mediums. You know, a lot of producers kind of just produce in theater or film, but I was able, fortunately, to be able to produce in all of them.
Well, look, let me just start out by giving a little background. You were born, as I was, if I'm not mistaken, in the Bronx, right?
Correct.
How did you know? We have so much in common. That's what I want to talk about. Uh, your 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 book was, I think, the first printing was just sold out, right?
It sold out in 2 days, which is the biggest shock I've ever had. And as a friend of mine said, you don't even have that many friends. So how could that happen? But it did. But yes, the Bronx was a very important part of my childhood. I'm sure it was of yours too, Mike. You know, and go ahead.
Well, strangely enough, I was born in the Bronx. We lived at that time. My folks, who were two of the greatest stars of the Yiddish theater, on Second Avenue in New York, and my mother's doctor practiced in the Bronx. So when she had to give birth, my do practice runs on the new highway, the East Side Highway, going up to the Bronx. And I was born with my twin sister at Dr. Leff's hospital. And after 7 days, we moved back. We came back to Second Avenue, but and to have my bris. So, but I was, technically I was born in the Bronx. I never really lived there, but I always say I was born in the Bronx, which is I guess, the only part
Only
of
borough with a the.
with a the in it, with a the in it.
Do you know why? I can tell you why.
You wrote about it in the book.
Well, yeah, the family that there were big farms above Manhattan.
Right.
People didn't go that far up to the Bronx, but a very rich family called the Bronx, Jacob Bronx, I guess he was from, I think, Holland,
Yes.
from the Netherlands, bought up there, and he was that wealthy, I guess his Rockefeller of his time, and people said, well, we have to go visit the Bronx. That's how it became, I'm told, the Bronx. But Mike, the interesting thing, I lived across the street from the Kingsbridge Armory, and the Kingsbridge Armory was the largest armory in the world, or so we were told. It was enormous. And before they built the Javits Center or the New York City Coliseum, the Bronx had the Kingsbridge Armory doing motorboat shows, car shows. All these shows that play in Manhattan now were in the Bronx first, but most importantly to an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, rodeos in the Bronx. We could go and see Buster Crabbe and Johnny McBrown and these guys, and they were lassoing and tying up heifers. I mean, it was unbelievable, and it was across the street from my house. So that
Well,
was something.
okay, so just a little background. Your parents were born in the States, or did they immigrate?
No, they were both born in America. My
And
grandparents were all from Europe, except for my mother's grandmother, who was born in Cleveland,
and where in Europe do you know?
Russia, and Germany. See,
Ru-
the name Schlossberg in German, Schloss, as you probably know, is a castle.
Castle, right?
Yeah. And Berg can be a hill or a mountain, not a B-U-R-G, it's B-E-R-G. But I couldn't start my company calling it Castle Mountain, so I called it Castle Hill.
Castle
Because,
Hill.
because first of all, Paramount, where I had just left, had the mountain, Paramount Studios, where I'd been a vice president of production. And on top of that, I thought, can't be too grandiose about this, Mike. I can't start with a mountain. I'll start with a hill. You know, that's the Jewish background. A little hill, a little bissel, and then we'll go big.
So, okay, so let me quote something that you write in your autobiography, which I thought was delightful. You write, quote, "My mother taught me." What was your mother's name?
Charlotte
Charlotte. Okay, and maiden name?
Bash, and she could bash. She lived up to her maiden name. She was the
Okay.
Bruce Lee of the Bronx.
So my mother taught me, and this is what you quote you: "It's not what happens to you in life; it's how you handle it." Okay. And you say that was a wonderful bit of advice that I cherish even today. Then you say, quote, "This too shall pass" was another one. And you say, "I've relied on that one a lot over the years, but her best was, don't judge people on what you would do yourself." Okay. That was your mother. This is what she told you. Now, your father, you say, on the other hand, he would sometimes sit me down and say, "Julie, always remember, if at first you don't succeed, forget it." And he and I would howl with laughter.
Yeah.
Okay, which one of those pieces of advice have you followed
All
since
four.
then? Both
All
of them?
four. But I actually, if at first you don't succeed, I guess I don't know. My wife will often say, if when I'm pushing up this giant rock up a hill, and she'll say, "You know, the universe is speaking. You're just not listening."
You were the Jewish Sisyphus,
That exact. Oh, great. That's right. That's right. And
pushing
that's what I
pushing
want.
the rock up the castle hill, up the
Yeah.
hill.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about a few people that I love about. First of all, to read your book is so easy because I hate these autobiographies where the chapters are so long
Yeah.
that by the time you get to the end of the chapter, you fall asleep, and the next day you forgot completely
What
what
you
you
read.
read.
Yeah.
So, you were very kind in giving us the ability to read so many wonderful stories, but not to have to really, sit there and concentrate so much. It's easy to read this. So I'm not saying it's light. The subject is light, but it's so wonderful to be able to read so much in a shorter time. And there are so many people that I'd like to talk about that we have in common. So let's start out with, you started out very young. What was the first thing in our entertainment world that caught your attention? I remember you mentioned Al Jolson, and we have that in common as well.
Well,
Uh,
you have a great deal in common with Al
yeah,
Jolson, between Al Jolson at the Winter Garden and Al Jolson that I saw you do, and you did a great Al Jolson. You really did, and you didn't you showed the warts. You showed him, but you're such a good song and dance man that you, and in many ways, brought me back to that Jolson that I knew not personally, but through the Jolson story and Jolson Sings Again. Uh,
did that influence you at all to go into the business?
I think the influence was my father. Even though he said forget it, he very much loved show business. My mother didn't at all. she got very upset with me when I brought home Variety, the newspaper, at 10 years old. She was outraged that I did that. But my father loved show business. He had a great singing voice, and he never did anything with it except sang for me. But I would think that the first influence would certainly be he was that. And I remember as a kid, for some reason, he knew Dave Garroway, who
Oh
was
my
the
God.
original.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, he was the original host of the Today Show,
Today Show. Yeah.
and he would end up with peace. He would put up his hand and say peace, and he took me to meet him, and I was so excited. So I think I was struck as a young kid by the radio. I'm sure you remember as well. If you kind of begin with the radio, it really fueled your imagination.
Imagination, of
Yeah.
course.
You were out there on the range with the Lone Ranger. You're walking down the steps to Jack Benny's vault. I mean, you're having one hell of a time in your mind. And I really feel sorry for young people today that they don't have, because television gives it to you. You don't really have to really imagine, you are watching it. And I think that's a real loss. And I think in my case, it was a real gain to have been brought up with radio. And then 2 years later, end up having my own radio show for 9 years in New York and around the country.
And I guess that's where you got to know so many of the great personalities in our business who were on your radio show to begin with. That was how you began, right?
That's right. That's true. But also remember, I worked at the ABC network before that, and I also ran a rather large theater chain as a film buyer for the Walter Reed theaters, and then I was a vice president of production of Paramount. So with all those kind of different diverse jobs, I would meet many people in entertainment, some who became my closest friends. My years at Paramount, which were 2 years, were not happy years for me, but ironically enough, I met lifelong friends from that period. So, as they say, the Lord closes the door, but he opens a window. So the windows got open even in the door being closed.
All right. So some of those lifelong friends, I'm going to throw some names at you. By the way, for anybody that's watching, Julian, it's not God shining down on him right now. I think you're sitting near near the window, right? And
yes, I've got the shades closed.
I think the shades are shining on you.
Well, I'm thinking to myself, look at this. Maybe this is a precursor. Maybe
it's an omen. It's an omen.
I'm hoping. But anyhow, yes, thank you, Mike, for pointing that out. And that's not my usual look. I generally don't have stripes across my face, but hey, we're Zooming. What can we do?
Yeah, no. All right, I'm going to throw some names at you. Okay. Yes. Some of the stories you tell, maybe not in order, but Cary Grant. Okay. Yes. We have something in common with Cary Grant. Talk to me about Cary Grant.
I was being handled as a producer by an agent named Irving Swifty Lazar.
Lazar, of course.
Right. And Lazar, of course, handled presidents and kings, and he was a giant. And I don't know how I got on his list, and I didn't last long on his list, but I was there for a while. And he had a very famous Academy Award dinner every year at the Bistro Gardens in LA. And so I was invited because I was a client. And at my table of 8 were people that I knew, but they didn't know me. Sitting directly across from me was Yul Brynner, who seemed so annoyed that I was at the table. Just seemed ticked off that this guy's at this table. I didn't say anything to him, but he was scowling from beginning to end.
How old were you at the time?
Let's see, 34, I guess, 34. Okay. Yeah. And to my right was Ginger Rogers, someone I admired as a great partner of Fred Astaire, but politically she was a little bit to the right of Attila the Hun. So politically we weren't going to be talking. And there was a couple of other people, Norman Krasner, a writer, but to my left was Mia Farrow. And Mia Farrow was a delight to meet. she was very, very vulnerable and very, very feminine, and as most actors can be, very seductive. Not sexually, I mean seductive as a person, just saying in essence, you may be the one who can save me. You might be the one, that kind of thing. So I'm talking to her and quite engaged, but I'm being tapped on the shoulder by Ginger Rogers, who wants to speak to me. I don't want to be rude to Ginger Rogers, and I don't want to stop talking to Mia Farrow, but somehow I excuse myself. I turn to Ginger Rogers. She says, I want you to meet, and down comes Cary Grant. Now, had I been told that Cary Grant was at the party, had I seen him walking over, but I just turn around and there is a guy that I had such admiration for as an actor, because he could do anything. He could do romance, he could do comedy, he could be drama, he could do it all, and charming as hell. And of course, I'm sure I did something a la Jackie Gleason about blah, 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 blah. But I did meet him, and it was quite exciting to talk to him. And he's all tan and had his hair gray, and it was just a lovely moment for me, even though a shocking one, because, it's one thing to see somebody on a 40, 50-foot screen.
Right.
There's their face right in your face, It was nice. It was nice. That's the only time I met him.
Well, I met him also once. That's one thing. It's interesting. Some of the people you write about, we have in common. This was 1972, I believe. I was in Los Angeles at the premiere of an Israeli film, Casablanca. There was an Israeli producer,
yes.
Nachem Golan, may he rest in peace. And he brought this movie, this Israeli musical, to Los Angeles. I happened to be there at the time, and we attended the premiere at a theater in Los Angeles. And who was the guest of honor? Your buddy, Cary Grant. And we were sitting upstairs, I remember, in the mezzanine watching the film. And as the film ended, we were coming down the staircase, and I happened to be walking down just alongside Cary Grant. He was in a tuxedo. And as we're walking down slowly, and there are photographers below us taking pictures. I have that photo. Actually, I can show it to you. Here it is.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
And as we're walking down, yeah, I'm the one. That's me. In case you didn't recognize. And
well, I wouldn't have recognized that picture from you, but that's true.
As we're walking down, I said to him that, because we're taking pictures, I said, would you mind if we, do you mind if we take a photo together? And what he said to me, I always quote when people ask me if I don't mind taking a photo with them, he said, if you don't mind my ruining your reputation. That was it. That was it. So that's something I always quote when people come up and say, do you mind if we take a picture together? I say, if you don't mind me ruining your reputation. Well, okay.
I think, Mike, his funniest line for me was he was being interviewed. At the end of his life, he would go around to colleges with clips of his movies and then speak. And so they were interviewing him at one of the colleges, and they said, my God, you're this and you're that, and you're so suave and you're sophisticated and unbelievable. And finally he said, listen, I'd like to be Cary Grant.
Okay, from the sublime to the, I won't say ridiculous, here's another name I'm going to throw at you, and we're really going from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
And this was, I was flabbergasted, because you start writing about a young man who came to you and wanted you to mentor him because he wanted to get into the business. And until you finally get to the name, I was flabbergasted. And the name is Harvey Weinstein. Weinstein, I guess. Can you briefly tell me?
Yeah. Out of the blue, this young man calls. He's a rock and roll promoter in Buffalo. His company is called Harvey and Corky. And they present, believe it or not, if Sinatra would go out on the road and do 5 or 6 gigs only in the country, they'd be one of them. That's how good rock and roll and regular promoters they were for any kind of music touring, including, let's say, the Rolling Stones. So he came to me to learn the film business. And he was a very smart, he was talented, he was funny, he was a lot of things. I never saw that side of him. He certainly was a street kid, but then again, so am I. So it's not, that didn't bother me. And I taught him the film business as best I could, whatever I knew. And certainly I knew more than he knew because he knew nothing about it. But of course, never in my wildest dreams did I expect him to hit the heights he hit or the depths he sunk. That I never expected.
And if I remember correctly, he asked you, I believe, or consulted with you about calling his company because you had used your name or your background for your company.
My parents' name, Charlotte and Lou.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he said he used his parents' name for his company.
That's right.
Which was it Miriam and Max?
Miriam and Max, yeah. And yeah, mine was Charlou Productions, my first company. And I was surprised he asked. It was, it gives you an example that he wasn't the kind of person I guess he evolved into. I mean, he came to ask if it was okay with me if he did the same thing with his parents. I said, sure. I didn't care, but I was surprised he asked.
And you had any inkling at the time, any hint in his personality that this guy was not quite what he eventually became?
No, as I say, I never expected him to go as far as he went, and I never expected him to go as low as he sunk.
Wow.
But interestingly enough, he had taste and he had intelligence and fun. We had a lot of fun together, but eventually we broke up because he did something that I didn't like. I had gotten him credit at a lab to make prints up because he had finally got into the film, but that's why he was coming to see me. And the owner called me and said, "Hey, I only gave him credit because you introduced me, and now he's not paying." And that's when I got very angry. And I just told him that it's through, we're done, and pay the guy, which he did. He did pay him. But I felt at that point that was not a right thing to do.
I guess there was a hint of things to come.
Yeah, but but talent, and he had a lot of stuff going for him. So it's very sad. He even had a lovely girlfriend at that time. There was I knew nothing of what seemed to happen later. But we all have our shadow side. We all have our demons that we're trying to work on. And I'm afraid he went a little much further than most of us.
Well, but again, to go back to what your mother said, don't judge people on what you would do yourself.
That's right.
Great. Yeah. Okay, here's another name, Frank Mancuso.
Oh, what a wonderful man he was.
Was that how you got into Paramount?
No, I for about, as Andy Warhol writes, you can get famous for 15 minutes. And while I wasn't famous in the public's eye, in the movie business, I became pretty hot because I had taken the Ziegfeld Theater, which had been built, 1,200 beautiful seats, and it had become a white elephant. No one wanted it. No one booked it. And in 1 year, I made it the highest grossing theater in the country, except for the Radio City Music Hall, because I put in 3 movies in a row that averaged at that time $60,000 a week, $3 million, an enormous amount of money for the year. That's Entertainment, Earthquake, and Tommy. Those 3 movies, and everybody all of a sudden wanted to hire me. I was no more than 15 minutes of this, Mike. I became as hot as I became fast, pretty cool too. But Paramount, all the studios wanted me to move to LA. I didn't like LA enough to move there. I didn't mind being bi-coastal, but they all wanted me to live there, and I didn't want to. And I didn't want to, not because of I was against LA. I was against what I was afraid I would become, because I could be easily that undertow of tennis courts and pools. I could be caught up in that. I didn't think I was necessarily strong enough to be able to withstand that kind of life. I was afraid, so I didn't do it. Paramount, Barry Diller offered me a great deal. He said, I'll tell you what, you come and you can stay a couple of weeks in New York, a couple of weeks in LA. And the reason he did it was Gulf and Western owned Paramount, and Charlie Bluthorn was in New York. So
Based in New York, yeah.
he had to be in New York. Barry did. So he figured, I guess if he could do that, I could do that. And that's why I went to Paramount. No, at that time, Frank was not the head of the studio. Barry was, and David Picker from United Artists. And then after David Picker, Michael Eisner. When I was there, Frank was the West Coast division manager for Paramount in sales. He was not running any studio, let alone Paramount. When the head of sales got ill, I was asked to take over temporarily because of my background in both distribution and theaters. And so I did. And that gentleman, after a month or two, died. And I was offered the head of sales. But I didn't want to be in that part of the division. I had left that part. I wanted to be in production. And so I turned it down. And Barry Diller, who was the head of the whole company, said, well, who do you recommend to run it? And I said, oh, well, are you talking internally or externally? Because there's some wonderful guys out in the marketplace. He said, no, I want to promote within. I said, there's only one man, and that was Frank. Now, I don't mean in any way to say he got the job because of me. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying I was asked who I recommend, and I recommended Frank. And he did, with or without me, he did just fine.
Well, just the list of names you just mentioned are the backbone of what was at that time the film industry. I mean, you're talking of all these names are some of the greats of the film industry, and some of them even to this very day. So that was how you were involved in the film, started in the film industry, distributor, producer, etc. Let's move to theatrical. And here's the next name that I think, if I remember correctly, that started you as a theatrical producer, and it's Renee Taylor and Joe Bologna. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. I had known Renee and Joe. I loved Lovers and Other Strangers that they wrote and performed in. And they came to me and they said, look, we have a play that we've just written. Would you like to hear it? I said, sure. They said, well, come over the house tonight and we'll read it to you. I said, okay, can I bring my mother? Because she was in town from Florida. And Joe said, can I bring my mother? I said, is this a game? He said, no, I mean it. I said, well, of course. So he brought his mother and I brought my mother. So they were the two actors. It was a two-hander. And there were three in the audience, two mothers and me. And we had a wonderful time, laughing our little heads off. So at the end, Renee, being as shy as she sometimes can be, said, you want to produce it? I said, Renee, I've never produced a play in my life. She said, so you'll learn with us. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, I have a couple of ideas, and I'm interested for one reason besides the fact that I really like this play. If an Italian mother and a Jewish mother both love this play, this could be a very good success, good sign for a success for me. And then I went out and I thought, well, the hell am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I'd never produced anything but a movie, and that was with a company paying the money. And I thought, well, I'm consulting for a fellow named Alan Klein. And Alan Klein was in the music business, and he had been the manager for Sam Cooke, and then the manager for the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. So consulting with him was was knowing that you had a guy who really had some money behind him. And I arranged for Joe and Renee to read the play again for the two of us. And they read it, and Alan and I laughed our heads off, and we left the room. It was in my apartment this time, not theirs. I left the room, and he said, "This is really funny." He said, "Have you ever produced a play?" I said, "No." I said, "Have you?" He said, "No." He said, "I'll tell you what, we'll learn together." And he put up all the money. He just put up all the money. And we opened on Broadway. We played 4 months. And we had a strange thing happen, Mike. I'll make a long story a little longer, I'm afraid. But Clive Barnes gave us a rave. Funniest show on Broadway. That should have been enough, right? The problem was he was no longer writing for the New York
For the
Times.
New York Times. He was with the Post, I think, at the time.
2 weeks before, he left the Times and went to the New York Post. And that was not enough for us. Frank Rich came in, didn't think it was that funny. But we played 4 months because Alan didn't mess around.
All right. There's another name we have in common. Maybe I should leave it for a little later on, but just to say that since that first play that you produced, you've gone on to produce, I think you've won, the plays have won, what, 6 Tony Awards, among others, all the way from that play, it was called My Life on a Diet, right?
Yes, I always said that was just with Renee. Joe had passed away, and I told Renee that every 39 years we're going to work together.
And you know, the list of plays that you have produced on and off Broadway goes on and on and on, all the way up to Bullets over Broadway. So it's been how many decades?
Well, let's see. I've been
producing 4.
89, I guess 4 or 5 decades.
4 or 5 decades.
And about 50 or some, about 50 or maybe more plays. Yeah.
All right. Just before I move on, you mentioned Frank Rich. Okay. This guy, unfortunately, ruined, a lot for me as well, because for those who don't know, if you don't get a rave review in the New York Times, you're in trouble. I mean, it unfortunately, it came down to that. And I was I was starring in a musical called Ain't Broadway Grand, 1993 on Broadway. It was my big thing. I was above the title. And Frank Rich saw the musical, and it wasn't a bad musical. It was pretty good. And he didn't like it. And at the time, it was a difficult time for me. My wife was struggling with a disease, and I really needed, and the producer who also wrote it promised us we would be there forever at the L'Enfantin Theater. And unfortunately, after Frank Rich wrote his review, 2 weeks later, the musical closed. And so that name to me is still I understood very well when you said he didn't like the play, but unfortunately, in those days, and even today, if you don't get a rave review, I mean, a good review isn't good enough. A rave review, that's what.
Well, it's so strange, Mike, that even sometimes if you have a terrific review, it's not enough even from them.
Yeah.
I opened a play with a wonderful actor named Tom Courtney.
Oh, my God, yes.
A fine actor, and it was called Moscow Stations. Now, it was a one-character play, and it was about a Russian drunken intellectual. So that's like 3 strikes commercially. A Russian, a drunk intellectual, especially 25 years ago. And Vincent Canby and the Times loved it. Well, I thought, this is it. I'm going to clean up. But the public said, we don't want to see a Russian drunk intellectual. And it didn't run. So you never can tell. The great thing is that musicals, not when you were talking, but now, musicals can overcome any bad review from the Times if the public likes it. Because it's now, Broadway is shockingly 70% tourists. 70%. And so they don't care about the times. I mean, you go back to Phantom of the Opera, Cats, Wicked, none of these got good reviews, and they're running today, you know. So it's not what they used to be. They can do, but they can make a play. There's no question. They can't kill a certain kind of musical. They just
Well,
can't now.
especially now that the corporate entities came in, I guess 2 decades ago, when as soon as Disney came in, that's the difference. I mean, when you talk about tourists, Disney is hard to beat.
It's true. And it's just not the kind of thing that interests me as it once did, I have
Exact.
to
Well,
say.
okay. Let me move on now to your relationship with a lady who I guess has influenced both personally and professionally your career and your life, and that's Elaine May.
Yes.
Talk a bit about Elaine and how she, until this very day, has been part of your life, and especially as a producer, as a
Well,
theatrical.
yeah, and as a friend, certainly, because she and Herb Gardner, the writer who wrote Thousand Clowns, I was going to leave Paramount and I was unhappy and I couldn't get out of my contract, but finally I was able to. The contract ended, so I could leave. They couldn't. I wasn't going to sign up again, and I was quite nervous. I was sounding like a man without a company, as opposed to Philip Nolan, a man without a country. I was a man without a company. But they took me out, both of them, and they said, look, if you open up the store, we'll help you fill the shelves. And I thought, what a great thing to say. And it really gave me the confidence. And Elaine said to me, look, you're a producer. You're not, you shouldn't be doing this executive stuff. You could really produce. And it was her encouragement and confidence in me that really helped me go and become a producer. I met Elaine in the strangest way, and that's what I said about Paramount. I didn't know Elaine before Paramount Pictures, but that was how we met. A mutual friend, Warren Beatty, the actor, had told her to call me, and when she called, I was shocked that Elaine May was calling me, and I said hello, and she said, "Look," the first words were, "Look, Warren Beatty said you're okay for a studio executive." So I thought,
I praise. I
I, I,
praise.
I was going to say it's strange kind of praise, Mike. Strange kind of praise. Look at how good are these studio executives. But we met. She had made a movie called Mikey and Nicky with Peter Falk and John Cassavetes, and I championed it at Paramount. We were not successful with it, but through some strange machinations that I write about in the book, Peter Falk, Elaine May, and I ended up owning the movie. We got the movie back, and to this day, I distribute it all over the world. In fact, we're opening in Belgium next month. So that was the beginning, and we became fast friends. And most people think I met Elaine through Mike Nichols because I knew Mike ahead of Elaine, but I didn't. I had met Mike when he had made a movie called The Fortune, and that's how I met him. He made a movie with Warren Beatty and Jack Nicholson called The Fortune in the 70s. And on paper, I was offered it when I was running Walter Reed Theaters. And they offered me two movies, Shampoo and The Fortune. Shampoo didn't interest me that much. I read the script. I thought it was okay. The Fortune, I thought, wow, that's pretty good. But in essence, I was told, if you want one, you've taken both. And I could have said, no, I don't want it. But I said, well, all right, I'll get The Fortune for the summer. Shampoo opened in the winter. Shampoo was a giant hit, huge hit. And The Fortune was not. But Mike had made The Fortune, and we became friends through that. And that's how I met Mike. And then, as I say, a year later, I met Elaine. And then I ended up representing to this day Mike Nichols and Elaine May on their films that they owned, and their CDs. So it's been a lovely relationship with all of them. And I'm very proud to represent Nichols and May, who I think are two of the greatest talents in the 20th century and now the 21st.
interesting how life is, full of surprises. One phone call can change, you know, uh, can change your life.
It really can.
She called you, and that, out of the blue. I do remember we all. By the way, you and I, we almost worked together.
Close.
Almost, was I auditioned for Death Defying Acts. That was a play that you did off Broadway. Elaine, Woody Allen, and I believe the third,
David Mamet.
David Mamet, right?
Yeah.
And the Woody Allen play, part of the three plays, one actors. I was at the time I was being represented by the William Morris office. Ed Robbins, may he rest in peace. And they sent me to audition for one of the parts. And I'll never forget, I came to an apartment building, and I was asked to, wait in the
Lobby.
in the hallway. And then somebody came out and said to me, "Okay, listen, you walk in, you don't look at Mr. Allen, you sit down, you read, the sides, and you walk out. You don't look at him, and that's it." And that was already a harbinger of what of my audition. And I remember it was kind of dark. I walked in. He was sitting up in like in an alcove on a couch with another woman, and there was a chair. It was kind of dark. I think there was like a reddish light, and I was scared out of my wits. I read the thing and I left, and obviously I didn't get it. I don't think we knew each other at the time. Probably we did, but it was Death Defying Acts, and the actor who eventually did it, after the show closed, he went out to the coast and became quite a successful character actor on television and in film. I think he's still working to this very.
Paul Guilfoyle.
Exactly.
Guilfoyle, yeah.
So that was almost you and I. And then there was another play that you produced about a Russian themed play, like I don't know whether it was Chekhov or somebody else. There was also a part there. So you never hired me. Let's put it this way, Julian. So there's still time,
But here's the great thing, Mike. You just hired me.
That's true. That's
true.
What goes around comes around. Okay, so
but let me tell you that you were in Woody's screening room. That was his screening room, believe it or not. And that is his office. Yeah. And that couch was probably on the couch was probably Gene Domanian, who was his producer and my co-producer. But it was interesting. Everything I had heard about working with Woody was, oh my God, you can't talk to him, you can't be blah, blah. But it wasn't the case with me. I was at almost all the casting sessions. In fact, I thought I was at all of them till today.
Yes,
I don't think I was there at that one. But a wonderful actress came in and he turned it down. And at the end of the session, I went to him and I said, "Woody, I've seen this actress on stage. She's really good." I said, "Would you consider seeing her again?" I was standing and he was sitting. And he looked up at me and he said, "I'll see anybody that you feel strongly about as many times as you want until one of us say yes or no." He said, "I didn't think she was good, but I'll try it." And she came back and she got it. She got the role. And I felt great about that. I did it a second time when we were replacing, because Linda Lavin started and then we brought in Valerie Harper to replace Linda after 6 months, because it was a big hit off-Broadway. It was the highest grossing off-Broadway play in off-Broadway history at that time. So I was feeling pretty excited about being the producer with Gene Domanian, the two of us. And we brought in the second lady, and the same thing happened. He turned it down. I said, "Would you please let me up?" Yes. Third time was a guy, and he turned him down. I went to him again. He said, "Hey, you're doing pretty good. Let's see him again." That was it. 2, I was out. He wasn't hiring that guy. So I did 2 out of 3.
All right, I want to move on a little bit because we're going to have to do a sequel to this one.
I'd love to, Mike. I'd love
But
to.
two names that really that we had in common, and just to mention them, Meyer Ackerman.
Yes.
I think we met through Meyer. Was it that how we met? How did we meet? I don't even remember.
It's we were doing so well on these questions.
Yes, and then it goes to memory. And we
Yes,
talk
and
about
all of a
memory.
sudden, I'm
Yeah.
good on some things and not others. I just remember coming to see you perform, I believe in Connecticut,
Yes.
and
And
you were sensational. You just were great. And I think it was a Jolson. It was a
it
Jolson.
was Jolson,
Yeah.
and you still didn't hire me. I was
Well,
so great, and you still didn't
this is
hire
a this is called getting Jewish
me.
guilt, giving
Yes,
Jewish guilt.
I want. By the way, you were talking about your mother and Joe's mother that came
Yeah.
to the reading. You know the
Yes.
difference between a Jewish or an Italian mother and a pit bull?
No.
The pit bull eventually lets go.
Well, Herb Gardner, who I mentioned earlier, said, just remember, he said, Italians are happy Jews.
But guilt is still there. Guilt is
Oh,
universal.
yes,
The other name is Lenny Soloway, who I understand passed away.
he did. He did.
Uh,
Yes.
Again, we're talking about people in the business at that time who were really devoted, and they did this out of love and out of devotion to our industry. Another one is Bill Haber.
Oh,
You
yes.
mentioned in your book.
He saved me. Bill Haber saved me on the show I was doing with Twiggy and Harry Groner about Noel Coward and Gertrude Lawrence, and a musical called If Love Were All. And I was going to have lunch with him. And right before the lunch, someone who had promised money pulled out, as sometimes they do. It's not what you want to hear. In fact, you do want to commit some sort of crime against them, but you figure you better not. And I walk into this lunch, and Bill says, "Wow, you don't look very happy." And I said, "Oh, can't believe it. The guy just walked out on me a week before we start rehearsal." I said, "I got to raise this money." And he said, "Well, how much do you need?" And I told him, and he said, "I'll give it to you." I said, "What?" He said, "I'll give it to you." I said, "Oh, Bill, that's just so great. I mean, I thank." He said, "No, just you got it." Well, it was a great lunch. Of course, I paid, but amazing thing, because you have, as you know, you've got to send out papers. People have to sign. They have to do all kinds of stuff to invest, because New York State is very tough about investments, and you got to be able to afford to lose the money, and all kinds of things you sign. So I'm preparing the papers, and in comes a messenger with the check. He didn't get the papers. He hadn't signed the papers. He'd sent the check by messenger. It doesn't get better than that.
And it doesn't it happens. It never happens like that.
Never happened before or since.
Yeah, my story with Bill is, for those who don't know the name, Bill was an agent at the William Morris office in Los Angeles, 1972, and I had just done a play on Broadway. My first dramatic role was in a play called Inquest, and it was about the Rosenberg trial, with a great director and great actors, Alan Schneider, unfortunately, who was killed by an accident in London.
Taxi
But
cab.
he directed Annie Jackson, George Grizzard, James Whitmore, great actors. And I was at the time with the William Morris office. And I wanted to go to California. So they said, "We need your body out here. If you want to come out here, you got to move out here." So I came out there. And my first meeting with the local agents that I was assigned to in Los Angeles were Bill Haber, Michael Ovitz, and Ron Meyer. Those were the three agents in 1972 at the William Morris office. And I had the first meeting, as you probably know. You sit around, all these guys in suits, and they all are very pleasant, and they ask you questions. And for a year and a half that I was in Los Angeles, never heard back
Yeah.
from either one of them.
That's
But
the only
Bill,
time, Mike, that you meet your agent.
yeah, that's when I met the agent. And eventually I left Los Angeles, went back to Israel, and I found out that these three guys left the William Morris office and founded a company called CAA. And the rest is history. But
That's
then
right.
Bill left, I guess, and has been producing ever since. But he's a really, really lovely guy. The other man that we mentioned was Mark Golub, and just talk a little bit about Mark, how you
Sure.
met him.
Mark,
Unfortunately, we lost him
just
recently.
recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Mark, when I was at WMCA, Mark was there in some sort of capacity. I'm not exactly sure what, but he was there and he was a fan of my show. And I liked him a lot. And when I started producing one day, he called me. And I'm not in any way comparing him to Harvey Weinstein, but he did say, would you consider teaching me the theater business? I always wanted to produce. I said, sure. I said, and in fact, this was pre-Bill Haber's story. I said, in fact, I'm producing a show with Twiggy and Harry Groner about Gertrude Lawrence and Noel Coward. And I would let you sit by my side, see what it is to produce. And he came in, he put up his share of the money, and he became a producer with me. And I took him to advertising meetings and casting sessions, marketing and promotion. And he enjoyed it. He was very grateful to me, and I was happy to have him by my side. And he became a producer, and I started him.
He became a producer and eventually established JBS, a Jewish broadcast service. And our talk today will be up on his platform
Well, that's
pretty
lovely.
soon.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I told him all of my Mike Burstyn and friends I have given him as a gift because he was ill for the last few years, and unfortunately he passed away. So it's a tribute to Mark. His whole life was devoted to Jewish causes, Jewish education, which was so important to him. So we'll be on JBS with this as well. And now I'd like to talk about your projects that you're doing right now, which is the project you've devoted the last few years to. And can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm not, you'll forgive me, it's not that I'm loaded with projects, but ironically with the pandemic, I am, so you'd have to help me. And I'll tell you the next project I'm doing. Next month, we start rehearsal on a play that's based on a book. The book is called The Gutenberg Bible.
Oh, yeah.
But before one thinks we're talking in terms of religious, the play is going to be called Tales from the Gutenberg Bible, and it's going to star Steve Guttenberg. So he wrote a book. I loved the book. I called him and said, look, Steve, why don't you try to adapt this to a play and I'll produce it? Really? He said. I said, yeah, just try to do it. Let's see if I can help you and maybe whatever. Anyhow, he did it. And I sent it to David Saint, who runs the George Street Theater in New Brunswick, where the home of Rutgers, one of the homes of Rutgers. And we start rehearsal to March. We open in April. And I'm excited about it because I haven't produced in a couple of years, except for because of the pandemic. But people seem to be going back a little bit to theater. His story is amazing, Mike. Without any schooling or actor's studio or anything, at 17 years old, with the name Guttenberg, he flies to LA to become a movie star. What? How's that possible? And they ask him to change his name. He doesn't change his name. And he sneaks on the Paramount lot and he sets up an office there. And his story is so amazing. He ends up starring in Diner, Three Men and a Baby, Cocoon. I mean, it's amazing. 5 police academies. He became a huge movie star. And it's very similar to me to Alice in Wonderland, except it's Steve in Hollywood. But it's
And
really something.
we just saw him, as a matter of fact, in a feature on Lifestyle,
Lifetime. Yeah.
Lifetime,
All
and but we
Murder.
weren't sure that that was him, and it was with
Yeah, it was with Sybil Shepherd.
Sybil Shepherd. Yes, and and my wife Siona said, "Isn't that Steve Guttenberg?" I said, "Well, it doesn't look like him because he's bald and he has a mustache, but in the end, it was."
It was him, and he's not bald, but he was in the film.
Yes. No, what I was talking about is what you have been doing, your documentary series that you
Oh,
devoted so much time to,
oh,
interviewing
yeah,
people of the past century.
yeah. Called Witnesses to the 20th Century.
Exactly. Talk
Yes,
to me a little bit about that.
yes. Well, it seems that I've been working on that since my bar mitzvah, but but it's not. I decided, having watched Ken Burns' Civil War, I thought how great that is, except they're reading letters written by people. I'm living in the 20th century. Maybe I can get them on camera to sit and talk about the major events of the 20th century, how it affected them, but also how they affected the century. And so I was able to get 140 people in all areas, starting with, let's say, President George H.W. Bush and Sandra Day O'Connor and Archbishop Tutu, but then into our business, Clint Eastwood and Angela Lansbury. I wasn't looking for Miley Cyrus. I was looking for people who lived the century, who were there, who were around for 40, 50 years. And so obviously a lot of older people are on the show. 7 secretaries of state. I mean, it's an incredible group of people talking about the 20th century. We start in 1900, we go to 1999, and we talk in terms of, well, we use newsreel footage, we use film clips, and obviously a lot of these sound bites from these people. So I'm very excited about it. And who is writing it and who is directing it? A woman named Elaine May.
Exactly. But
And
who is hosting it? A gentleman who I guess you were able to get their confidence for all these people to sit down with you. That says something, a little tribute to you as a mensch.
well, I must say it boggles my mind to look at this list of people and see, my God. But you see, Mike, I did something interesting like you're doing today. I didn't have notes. I studied though beforehand.
Yeah,
I did my homework. And the brain, as you know, is a muscle. It kind of responds to stimuli. And instead of looking down, they're not reminded they're on television so much because I'm just talking to them the way
e-
you and I are speaking.
exactly,
And
exactly.
and so they're not interviews, they're conversations.
Yeah, that's exact when COVID started to like 2.5 years ago. Same thing. I was stuck at home, and I said, what am I going to do? Zoom, you just became popular. I said, let me try and just because I can't visit with my friends in person, and I want to stay in touch. So maybe let's use this. Sometimes tragedies can create opportunities like with this Zoom, which is amazing. And so I said, let me see if I could do this with friends who can't leave their homes. And I said, if I can get one person that should be, someone important, maybe that'll kick it off and others will want to join as well. And the first one I approached was Norman Lear, who I've known for 40 years, and he's same guy that he always was. He agreed to do it, and that was the beginning of Mike Burstyn and Friends. So I've been blessed with friends like you that we can just schmooze. And as you said, I didn't prepare anything. We're not reading anything. It happens, and it happens because people communicate, and that's the problem today. Nobody communicates anymore. Everybody's got their own, agenda, and they talk at each other, not with each other. And that's so important. So my dear friend, I mean, as I said, we could go on and on. I think maybe we should do a second one.
I'm ready, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm ready right now.
Right. Okay, before I let you go, I always ask my friends at the end of our schmoozes um, to tell me uh, who or what it was that inspired them. So I'd like to ask you, who was it, either personally or professionally, that was your inspiration?
Well, certainly Elaine May, as I mentioned earlier, a wonderful friend, but someone that I knew would be there. And, I knew I was facile. I knew I was reasonably quick, but she is really brilliant. And if she thought I was smart, all of a sudden I thought, hey, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm not just facile. Maybe I have some more going for me. So she really, in a way, changed my career because, as I said, up until Elaine and I met her, I was an executive, either at the ABC network, the Walter Reed Organization, Paramount Pictures. And she said, no, you're a creative guy. You ought to go into producing. And so I guess she would be the answer. And I'm happy to say she wrote the foreword to the book.
I did read that. And what about personally? Who would you say inspired your life?
My wife, my last wife, Marin, my wife, who
Your present wife.
the present wife, who is the kindest, most loving woman on the planet, perhaps in the world. It's just hard to talk about how somebody has really changed my life as she did. There's a great parable in the story of Androcles and the lion, and the lion is terrorizing a town, and Androcles has gone to supposedly stop the lion, and he gets to the lion and he says, I see why you're so unhappy. You've got a thorn in your paw. And he takes it out. And that's what Marin did for me. I had a lot of anger within me. I had a bad temper. And she just was able to get rid of it. But like even AA, you can't ever say it's gone. You hope it's gone. And it's pretty much gone for the last 30 years that we've been together. And therefore, if I'm elected, Mike,
If you're elected, I will run with you.
oh, great. That's great.
Yes.
Then we'll be together finally.
I will be by your side.
Oh, I would love it. I would love it.
My
Anyhow,
friend, thank you so much. And I really recommend anyone who has watched this amazing conversation between two Altecacas that you get the book. You can get it, I guess on Amazon or wherever you get.
can I say one quick thing? In
Yeah,
2
please.
days, we went through our first printing, and they're printing right now. It says temporarily out of stock. I was so depressed until my publicist said, are you crazy? You should be thrilled. It's temporarily out of stock. You're sold out. So
Well, they should have printed more than 6 books. They should have been a little more optimistic.
But
Julian,
yes,
Julie, can I call you Julie?
you can call me anything but late for dinner.
Julie, thank you for being with me, and thank all of my friends who have been watching. And I hope we'll see each other next time on Mike Burstyn and Friends. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves, stay safe, and see you next time. Shalom.
Shalom.